Hey everyone! Today we're diving into the story of one of the most extraordinary airplanes ever built, the Junkers G-38. This was not just a passenger aircraft, it was a flying giant, a technological experiment, a symbol of ambition, and a glimpse into an alternative future of aviation that almost was. Settle in because this is a long, detailed, and fascinating journey into early 20th century aviation history. To understand the Junkers G-38, we need to go back to Germany in the early 20s. World War I had ended in catastrophe for the German Empire. The country was economically broken, politically unstable, and heavily restricted by the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was forbidden from building many types of military aircraft, and its aviation industry faced severe limitations. But adversity often fuels innovation. Civil aviation was one of the few paths left open. Engineers, designers, and visionaries began asking a bold question. If we can't dominate the skies militarily, can we lead the world in civilian aviation? One man stood at the center of this vision, Hugo Junkers. Hugo Junkers was not a traditional aircraft designer. He was an engineer, inventor, and professor, deeply fascinated by thermodynamics and metal construction. At a time when most airplanes were made of wood, fabric, and wire, Junkers believed the future belonged to all-metal aircraft. His earlier designs, like the Junkers F-13, the world's first all-metal passenger airplane, had already proven him right. The F-13 was revolutionary, safe, durable, and commercially successful. But Junkers was never satisfied with small steps. He dreamed big, very big. He imagined giant aircraft, flying palaces in the sky, carrying passengers in comfort across continents. And this dream would eventually take physical form as the Junkers G-38. The Junkers G-38 was unlike anything the world had ever seen. At its core, it was built around a radical idea. The wing itself would be large enough to carry passengers. Yes, people would sit inside the wing. This concept, sometimes called a thick wing or flying wing cabin, allowed engineers to use the internal space of the wing for seating, observation rooms, fuel tanks, and structural reinforcement. While the G-38 was not a true flying wing like later designs, it was decades ahead of its time. When the Junkers G-38 first rolled out in 1929, its size shocked observers. Wingspan 44 meters, 144 feet. Length 23 meters, 75 feet. Maximum takeoff weight around 24 tons. For comparison, many airliners of the time carried fewer than 10 passengers and looked fragile by contrast. The G-38 looked like a metal cathedral with wings. All-metal structure. True to Junkers' philosophy, the G-38 was built entirely from corrugated duralumin, a lightweight aluminum alloy. The corrugated skin gave the aircraft its iconic ribbed appearance. While it increased drag, it provided incredible structural strength, allowing thinner internal frames. This construction method was proven, but never before on such a scale. Here's where the Junkers G-38 truly becomes fascinating. Depending on configuration, the aircraft could carry 30 to 34 passengers, which was extraordinary for the late 1920s. But it wasn't just about numbers, it was about experience. Seating inside the wings. Passengers didn't just sit in a narrow fuselage. Some of them were seated inside the thick wings near the leading edge. From there, they could look out through large windows and watch the ground pass beneath them. Imagine sitting inside the wing of a giant metal bird, looking straight down at the landscape below, an experience no modern airliner offers. Cabins and comfort. Inside, the G-38 featured spacious cabins, upholstered seats, large windows, dining areas, sound insulation, advanced for its time. Flights were smooth and relatively quiet thanks to the aircraft's massive size and stable flight characteristics. For wealthy passengers of the era, flying aboard the G-38 felt closer to traveling in a luxury train or ocean liner than a fragile airplane.
The Junkers G38 was powered by 4 engines mounted in pairs on the wings. Early versions used Junkers L55 inline engines, while later configurations experimented with different power plants. Each engine produced roughly 300 to 400 horsepower, modest by today's standards, but impressive for the era. Interestingly, 2 engines were mounted in a push-pull configuration, one pulling, one pushing, reducing asymmetric thrust in case of engine failure. This configuration improved safety and control, which was critical for such a massive aircraft. The G38 made its first flight on November 6, 1929, piloted by experienced Junkers test crews. Observers were stunned. Newspapers described it as a flying hotel, a monster of the skies, the future of passenger transport. Crowds gathered just to watch it taxi, take off, and land. At air shows, the G38 became an instant sensation. Nothing else looked even remotely similar. The G38 entered service with Deutsche Lufthansa, later Lufthansa, Germany's national airline. Routes. It primarily flew domestic and European routes, including Berlin-Hamburg, Berlin-Frankfurt, occasional international demonstration flights. Because of its size, the G38 required long runways and strong ground infrastructure, limiting where it could operate. Reliability and performance. Despite its experimental nature, the G38 proved surprisingly reliable, stable in flight, comfortable for passengers. However, it was also expensive to operate, complex to maintain, and limited in speed compared to smaller aircraft. This would become a critical issue. Despite its success, only 2 Junkers G38 aircraft were ever constructed. Why? Economic reality. The Great Depression, beginning in 1929, devastated airlines worldwide. Passenger numbers fell, budgets shrank, and experimental luxury aircraft suddenly became liabilities. Airlines needed smaller, faster, cheaper airplanes. The G38 was magnificent, but impractical on a global scale. As the 1930s progressed, Germany's political climate changed dramatically. The rise of the Nazi regime shifted aviation priorities from civil luxury to military utility. Hugo Junkers himself fell out of favor with the government. His company was effectively taken over, and his influence diminished. The era of peaceful flying palaces was coming to an end. One of the 2 G38s was later converted for military use. It was redesignated Junkers K-30 and later K-38, serving as a transport aircraft, a VIP aircraft, a propaganda symbol. Its enormous internal volume made it useful for carrying personnel and cargo. However, it was never suited for combat. The final chapter of the Junkers G38 is a tragic one. During World War II, both aircraft were destroyed. One was damaged beyond repair. The other was destroyed during Allied bombing raids. No complete G38 survives today. Only photographs, drawings, models, and written accounts remain. Although the Junkers G38 was not a commercial success, its legacy is immense. Influence on aviation design. It influenced later wide-body aircraft, flying wing concepts, internal wing volume usage, structural design of large metal airframes. Many of its concepts would reappear decades later in aircraft like the Boeing 747, Airbus A380, and experimental flying wings. A symbol of what could have been. The G38 represents a fork in aviation history, a path where air travel focused on space, luxury, and experience, not just efficiency and speed. In another world, airports might have been built for giants like the G38, and flying could feel more like traveling on an airborne ocean liner. Today, aviation is dominated by optimization, fuel burn, turnaround times, seating density. The Junkers G38 reminds us that aviation was once driven by pure imagination. It was bold, it was beautiful, it was impractical, and it was unforgettable. The Junkers G38 was not just an airplane, it was a statement. a statement that humans could build something enormous, elegant, and visionary, even in times of hardship. And even though it disappeared from the skies, its spirit lives on in every wide-body aircraft that carries hundreds of people across the world today. If you enjoyed this deep dive into aviation history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Let me know in the comments which aircraft you'd like to explore next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Aeroplane emoji.